All right, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me, me okay? My mic's on? All right. So I was asked to spend the next 4.5 hours with you talking about our financial roadmap. No? That's not. I'm just joking. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. I hope everybody had a nice lunch. And I would just begin by saying if I'm boring you or talking about something that's not relevant, please feel free to ask questions and jump in and make this interactive. What I thought I would do is take about 15 minutes and just share with you a little bit about kind of how we're organized at IBM, how we try to approach IT. Wouldn't it be funny if this was my mistake? And then some of my focus areas for 2018, and then invite our distinguished panel members up to the stage for a Q&A session. So should be a good time. I think all of you kind of heard earlier in the day, right? IBM, large technology company, significant service provider to many of your agencies. You know, and as was said, it is a great personal privilege to me to be able to work at a company that is involved in so much work with all of you. I believe in the mission, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to participate in whatever capacity I can. And similarly, you know, if you're a technologist and you're sort of passionate about technology, IBM has a special place in a lot of people's hearts for our heritage. Started out making meat slicers. Some people would argue it still feels like we're in a meat slicer. Mainframes, hard drives, you know, so everyone remembers the electric typewriters. We had 2,000 IBMers. I think they mentioned this morning, working at NASA on the moon landing. Invented the barcode. LASIK eye surgery was a kind of serendipitous thing that came out of an IBM lab with two scientists trying to figure out how to slice deli meat without burning it. And more recently, the quantum work going on, which is actually very exciting. And last year, IBM put a 50-qubit computer on the internet and working on the kind of quantum advantage and some of the things you heard about this morning in Dr. Kelly's session. So a little bit about me. I did get an early start in the IT profession. That's me when I was younger. I guess technically all pictures are of people when they were younger. That's just kind of how cameras work. But when I was a lot younger, and for a while I thought I might go into entertainment. That's, I guess maybe I'm sort of still in entertainment, but in a different way. But it's kind of more the family business. And I was an intern at the David Letterman show and worked as a joke writer at the Conan O'Brien show for a while. But when I graduated from college, you know, ultimately it was pretty clear to me where my passions really lied, and that was in technology. Moved out to the West Coast, got a job at Intel in Santa Clara for about a year doing help desk work. Then moved over to Walmart.com, which is their e-commerce division. Sort of looks like I work in a store, but that's not. I worked at the .com, and that's where I got my Microsoft MCSE certification, my Cisco CCIE, became a network engineer, and then a manager of the network function, and then eventually the manager of what Walmart called kind of enterprise systems, which was all the back office functions. And then more recently came to IBM, and I've been privileged to be in the CIO role for exactly a year. It's my 1-year anniversary. They're like dog years, so it feels like it's been longer. But anyway, we are a fairly large organization, about 365,000 full-time regular employees. At any given time, there's a contingent labor force of around 30,000 contractors. In a given year, we might have about 80,000 contractors move through the organization. But at any given time, we're supporting a population of around 400,000 people in 170 countries. And I think it might be a surprise for people in the room that the IBM today, more than half the company has been there for less than 5 years. So things like being able to have clarity of mission purpose, how we collaborate, the toolings, how work gets done, things like that become really critical to our success. The organization that I'm responsible for, the Office of the CIO, we're about 12,300 people. I'm approximately 60-40 split, 40% being my own retained organization, and then sort of 30-30 between the two outsourcing parts of IBM, GBS, Global Business Services, is my preferred provider of application development. GTS, Global Technology Services, is my preferred provider of infrastructure and hosting. And you kind of see our split there of offices, and mostly it's regular employees, although we do have about 11% of contractors and supplementals. So IBM runs the largest privately owned network in the world, outside of, I think, the US government, and even there it's sort of federated. It is a very large, globally distributed network, right? You can see some numbers there, 22,000 WAPs or access points, it's actually more like 1,600 firewalls, 1,500 routers, large global infrastructure. Like many of you, we're a large mainframe operation as well. Have about 43 or so mainframes, a bunch of the new Z14s for pervasive encryption, and then more than a very significant portion of the quarter-end sort of financial core processes, closing the books, those kinds of things, the transactional systems that really run the business. A lot of those are on mainframe today as well. A little bit of size and scale. So we manage about 9,000 printers around the world. My team runs a help desk that services IBM's internal population. That gets about 2.4 million tickets per year. We onboard about 65,000 new employees every year between mergers and acquisitions, attrition, contractors, and so on. And just over 550,000 laptops under management. For the most part, everyone at IBM gets a laptop. Certain specialized environments get different equipment, but generally most knowledge workers get a laptop. If you're curious, we provision about 175,000 laptops per year. Most people at IBM are on a 4-year refresh, unless you're a developer or a researcher. We do run a mixed environment, so we've got a lot of Windows, now a lot of Mac OS, fairly significant Linux population. Our mobility footprint, running about 230,000 or so mobile devices under management by our MDM. We obviously use IBM's own MDM there. And you can see we're like 72% Apple, 28% Android. Every time I show this slide, I say we'll have BlackBerry out of the environment soon. The thing is, it's the only people left with BlackBerry are all the people who can fire me. So maybe I should just learn to love it. I don't know. Anyway. So a little bit of history. Once upon a time, IBM had like 130 CIOs. There were CIOs for every industry, every geography, every business unit. And I think that was a challenge for us, right? The joke was 130 CIOs can and did do a lot of damage. And so for a number of reasons, IBM decided to create what we called the Globally Integrated Enterprise. It's a shared services model with highly centralized functions. And so today we have 10 core enterprise services. And those are HR, finance, procurement, real estate, CIO, legal, something called enterprise services, which is kind of a strategy function, marketing, global administration, and sales and marketing support. And so I'm the CIO function. And so we kind of went from 130 plus to 1. There's one IT department inside of IBM, one CIO. Now, it's a kind of a longer story. Maybe we'll get into it in the panel, but I kind of have two budgets, right? I have my actual direct budget, and then I have an overlay measurement of all IT spend across the company. And that's really kind of the way they got a handle on this. But just because you say you're going to centralize and get a handle on the money, it doesn't necessarily change the way work gets done. And the reality was, it was not at all uncommon for us to have developers in one place, testers in another, product owners in another, project managers in another, and you have this kind of crisscrossing the globe to get any kind of work done. And this is the human glue that sort of leads to inefficiency. By the way, when the way that work gets done is complicated, that tends to manifest itself in the solutions that you build. And so when people would say there's nothing left to optimize, we're into the bone, we can't cut anymore, the white space is all this kind of human glue that's required to get anything done. So we've been on a very sustained and directed effort to advance our agile practices, change the way that work gets done, bring teams together, co-located in fewer numbers of offices, in 8 to 10 person teams, right? The 2 pizza team rule, no teams bigger than 2 pizzas can feed. 8 to 10 people form what we call a squad. Groups of squads form what we call a tribe. Groups of tribes form what we call a domain, led by an individual domain leader. All of my direct reports are domain leaders. I have 9 of them. We've kind of carved up the world by various things, infrastructure, employee provisioning, and so on. And then we brought in the Agile methodologies, and there are kind of 12 core Agile practices, principles. Those are the same kind of everywhere in the market. The way we brought that into IBM, this program is bookended by actually organizing the teams around the work, kind of org design, and then on the other side of it, tools, metrics, measurements, to have the right feedback loops in place to make sure that our practices are maturing, the teams are able to move more work through in a given 2-week iteration period, that the code quality is improving, all the things you sort of care about as a software development or IT delivery shop, right? The DevOps, both sides of that. But one of the things about Agile is it doesn't actually say anything in the Agile manifesto about design. And that's another modification that we made to the way we've interpreted the Agile program in our Agile at IBM, is having a design resource be part of the construct of these 8 to 10 person squads, so that it's not an afterthought that I run it past some design team before something gets released to everybody, but it's an ongoing part of the 2-week cycles of work from start to finish, that there is design, and not just visual design, but also kind of human-centric design, user experience, content, those sorts of disciplines. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Yep, so these are the 9 domains that I have, sort of how I've carved up the IT world. So our purpose inside of IBM, our mission is pretty straightforward. We're here to create a productive environment for IBMers around the globe, to improve our ability to attract and retain top talent, in particular engineering talent and technical talent that would otherwise be going to some of our competitors, to enable the IT conditions necessary to support what we would call the cognitive enterprise, AI, machine learning, blockchain, Watson, cloud, and so on. And then last but certainly not least, to make sure nothing leaves IBM that's not supposed to. And as much as we worry about our data, we really worry about all of your data. And so that's sort of our kind of tactical mission statement. But said another way, you know, over time people steal your technology, or they try to anyway, but it's pretty difficult to steal somebody's culture, right? And so we spend a lot of time thinking about IT as a driver of culture change. The culture of a place is really a function of how work gets done. Over 60 years ago, Thomas Watson said good design is good business. The difference is in 2018, that is no longer a profound thought, right? When did it become okay to live like the Jetsons at home and the Flintstones at work? In 2018, we just cannot be putting things out there that look like CLI output from a Cisco router, right? It's got to sort of line up to what you've been informed by. In particular, new people coming into the business have very little tolerance for this, right? People's expectations 5, 4, 3, even 2 years ago, they're coming in here with an experience that's been informed by Netflix and sort of consumer properties. And so we try to embrace a philosophy that the state of IT is a reflection of what we think and feel about our employees. And if we really believe that, then the experience that we're delivering to people in the IT environment is not trivial. It's actually core to our strategy for success. And then finally, this idea that the product is the experience and the experience is the product, right? That in a sort of cloud, SaaS-enabled world, you can no longer mask a bad product or a bad provisioning experience with some other piece up front. That these things are kind of connected in an end-to-end way, and people perceive them as one continuous value stream or flow, or however you want to characterize it. But we got to sort of take an end-to-end user-centric view of what the total experience is going to be. And so with that in mind, my team recently came together and said, for 2018, how do we really capture our values, our mission, our purpose inside of IBM? And we came out with this, which I really love, a nutritional facts poster. So if you were to go to any of our offices around the globe, you would see this poster. And essentially what I'm trying to capture with this is I'm looking to hire people who are kind, passionate about their craft, and believe in our purpose. And if I do those things correctly, we will be successful. And so at the bottom of this is our mission statement. We create a productive environment for IBMers. Our people do that by leading with design to drive simplicity and ease of use, engineering the systems that run the business, and innovating to transform the business. And that last one is an important one because it gets at that we don't want to take some analog process and put a digital overlay on it, that there is a whole other piece of this, of business transformation and process transformation that has to occur to get that outcome that we want. And when you take something analog and digitize it, you get this, which is an example of taxi dispatch software. When you create a new digital business, you get this. And so if you sort of look at the modern development stack, and you got infrastructure as a service at the bottom, platform as a service at the middle, and people call this top layer a lot of different things. Let's call it functional platform as a service for today's purposes. And by the way, like, no one new is getting into the bottom here, right? Everybody kind of wants to sit at the top of this. But it sort of says, unless you happen to be one of these providers at the bottom, these are very expensive, complicated stacks to recreate. And what we're finding is people are leveraging these stacks so that they can focus on the things that are really core to their business instead of recreating all these wheels so that they can kind of get to the zero baseline to focus on their business. And a great example of that is Uber. If you think about Uber, like, what does Uber actually own? They don't own the cars. The drivers are not employees of the company. The whole infrastructure runs on AWS. The text message that you get comes from the Twilio API. Uber doesn't make maps. They just use Google. The payment processor is Braintree, which is now PayPal. And the email that you get comes from SendGrid. So they own no part of the technology stack of a $70 billion business. What they really own is the integration of these things and the experience. And that's sort of what we're seeing in the enterprise, right? I think for a lot of us, this is what our shop used to look like, and candidly, some of my shop still looks like, which is a lot of on-prem, you know, a lot of sort of recreating the core services so that people can get other work done. And today we're seeing a very different model start to appear. There's a kind of, let's say, a core of things that everybody at a company needs to work. At a place like IBM, everybody needs an ID, everybody needs a device. And then there's like this first ring of things that are common to everybody in the company. At IBM, everybody needs file sharing, everybody needs email, everybody needs an intranet. And as you move out, though, across the business into more and more specialized roles, it starts to get tailored to what people do, what kinds of roles they're in, what industries they're involved in. And it goes from applying to everyone to a more and more specialized subset of people. Does not mean, you know, because we think about these kind of things like, what does it mean to be an IT company, or an IT department in a technology company where the world is moving to cloud and SaaS? Do you even need an IT department? And I think you do, because when you look at this, it says enterprise IT is not dead. You actually have a much more complicated IT problem to solve, because someone's got to come along and integrate all this stuff with the compliance, the security, the administration, and so on required to keep the place safe. And so that's sort of how we see our role as an IT department in the kind of company that IBM is evolving over time. And I am seeing kind of similar constructs out in the market. The other thing that we are having some good success with is we've got a few examples under our belt of where we have taken the time to do the engineering work properly and infuse the right level of design and user experience, that employees will pull things from us. We don't have to push it on them, right? And so when that happens, all these kind of other ancillary activities that are there to help people use things that are difficult to use, adoption, enablement, evangelism, co-creation, organizational change management, those kinds of things are not necessary, because, like, no one had to come to my house to teach me how to use LinkedIn or Facebook, right? But we got a lot of enterprise software that requires a lot of hand-holding. So when I see project plans that have all this money going after the symptom instead of the disease, big red flag. We got to kind of back up a little bit and figure out why this is so complicated to begin with. And then just sort of philosophically, right, it's been a reorientation for us how we think about delivering IT services across IBM, where we've come out of this with an approach that says there are 3 legs to the stool of IT delivery. Give people the right devices, manage those assets in a modern way, and drive self-service in the environment. And in particular, if I do those first 2 things correctly, such that there are just fewer problems coming into the environment, I can then afford to staff a help desk that's totally driven on delivering a great experience to people, not measuring things like talk time, speed to closure, number of tickets, very rigid sort of playbooks of what they can support and not support. I cannot care whether it's supported application, not supported application, BYO, company owned or otherwise. If you call us, we'll help you. And so, you know, we still got work to do, obviously, but over the last 24 months, every year we take an employee engagement survey, and it measures things like, do you understand how IBM operates? Are you aware of our business model? Are you engaged as an employee? Do you like working here? Would you recommend working here to a friend? And over the past 24 months, that number is up 16 points, and the #1 reason listed by employees is better tooling from IT. So we take that as a nice testimonial that we're doing some things well. And then I think this will be no surprise for anybody in the room, sort of, you know, our focus areas for 2018 anyway. Secure the enterprise, that's a never-ending exercise. Create a culture of engagement and inclusion. Infuse design and user experience across the entire IT portfolio. Continue to evolve our agile practices. We're well on our way on that journey, but that's always a evolution of continuous improvement. And then leverage our own IBM technologies in the solutions that we build. And so with that, let me stop here and invite, we're very lucky to have a very distinguished group of panel members to come up and have a Q&A session. We'll go over some questions, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So if I could invite to the stage, I'm Frank Knishi, Dr. Theresa Lang, and Pat Arvidsson. And rather than me stumble through introductions for them, I think what we'll do is have everyone come up on stage and just invite everyone to give a kind of introduction to themselves. Welcome. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. If anybody gets thirsty, there's water under here. Hopefully this won't be that taxing that you get dehydrated. All right. Well, why don't I ask each of you maybe to give a little overview. I didn't really, it's on the slide there, kind of what your agencies you're representing and your roles, but maybe we could kind of walk down and give a little overview of yourself and your role. And
Sure. Do you want me to start?
yes, please.
Awesome. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name's Pat Arvidsson. I'm from the Office of National Manager, National Security Systems, which means I'm actually from the office, we used to be called the Information Assurance Directorate from NSA. Quick little background. Previous to this job, I was the Executive Director for the Principal Cyber Advisor's Office. So I like to refer to myself as at one time the 5th most powerful person in the Pentagon in cyber, which meant that I got to get a lot of people coffee. The other thing is I actually run a organization called DoD CAR, used to be called NASCAR, NIPR SIPR Cybersecurity Architecture Review, now called DoD Cybersecurity Analysis and Review. And we're going to talk a little bit about it in a second. Going a little quick. First, I want to thank IBM. Thank you very much for having me. For those of you who don't know, I actually did a keynote for the Z14 folks, and part of it is very special to me. My father spent 12 years in the Marine Corps and got out after his 3rd tour in Vietnam and became a IBM Selectric repairman. And spent the next 30 years working for IBM until he retired out of Boca Raton as a project manager. And I got to follow him around at different places. And he gave me a very key piece of advice at one time. He said, "Don't go in the Marine Corps, you're too smart, go in the Air Force." And off I went. So with that said, right?
Okay.
So I spent a number of years in the Air Force until I transitioned over to the National Security Agency. What I do now is I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking to people about threat and understanding threat. And I want, in my last couple minutes here, as a part of the introduction, I want to kind of throw an analogy at you real quick. I want you to picture a building for me. And on the bottom of the building at the ground floor is your architects, engineers, your acquisition folks. The next floor up on your building is your system admins, your IT provisioners, account provisioners, your cable pullers, those kind of folks. And then the third floor above that is your incident response folks, right? They're the ones that respond to your threats and so forth. And above that is your command and control folks like Mr. Previn here and how they run the business and how they oversee the business. And above that, your customers. Folks that get on your network, get off your network, whether it's for email, they do a swipe, business swipe of a ATM card, or whether it's a tank driver or an aircraft fighter pilot who want to get on, get off, get some information, get off the network. Now, when I sit here and tell you that they're all sitting there and they're all doing their great things, and as myself as a national security agency, I walk in the room and go, Godzilla's outside the window. They all run the window and they look. And the architecture engineers and the acquisition folks look out there and they see feet. And they say, oh my gosh, I can't get stepped on. And your sysadmins look out the window and they see knees and they see, I can't get kicked. And your incident response folks see claws, and these claws are terrible. And then your business folks see shoulders and they say, hey, shoulders are kind of sexy. I want to know more about them, right? And then your customers see teeth and they see flames and so forth and so on, and they say it's bad. And then when I say to you, do you understand threat? They all nod their head up and down. They say yes. The reality is, for 30 years, we don't understand threat. We don't have a way to holistically talk about threat as a group. And we get trapped in this thing in our perspective, and we try to cover it up by saying we should do more information sharing. You're all going to be spearfished tomorrow, right? How much more information sharing do you want? In 2012, a nation state took out another nation state, Aramco, Saudi Arabia, with a very simple attack. That was in 2012. In 2018, over a month ago, the city of Atlanta was taken out with basically the same attack. How much more information sharing needed to happen? Right? So I'm being kind of scary and I'm kind of putting the place in a perspective, right? I will tell you this, we're trying to change that. There's a group that I work with, not only myself, DHS, NIST, DoD CIO, and others, DISA, but we're trying to put together a framework. It's on our website, NSA at IAD.gov, called the NSA Technical Cyber Threat Framework. It is now part of the executive order. Please download it. Please look at it. Please comment on it. It's completely unclass, right? The reality is this. Of all the stuff we're going to talk about the next 45, 50 minutes, right, until we get a handle on the threat, we're still going to be stuck having problems, right? So thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. I feel so much better now.
I was told to start off with a joke, but I was like, well, who knows?
Okay.
Right.
I'm Theresa Lang, and I'm the Director of Washington Operations for SPAWAR, and dual-hatted as the now Deputy Director for the Navy CIO Office. And that's a merger of the Navy Cybersecurity Office that I ran and the CIO Office for the Navy. And we brought cybersecurity and the CIO side together so that we would share information a little bit better and so that we could have a more holistic viewpoint of things. And it's been extremely helpful because, of course, the CIO side works with the business systems. And a lot of what we did on the cybersecurity side was work with the other parts of IT that we have to focus on. And those are the control systems. And we have a extreme range of control systems. The Navy has a much broader scope than people often realize, and that is we do have submarines, we have forces undersea, we have the surface ships, we have forces ashore, we have the second largest air force in the world, and we have a space area. So we kind of run everything. And all of those things have very specific control systems. And in today's world, everything is connected in some manner or other. And it is extremely important for us to understand the risk and to understand how control systems can be protected and can be rapidly restored. These are things that we spend a lot of time working on. And it's not just an IT problem. In 2014, we figured this out, and we said, there's a possibility that maybe our organizational structure isn't set up to make this work well. So we went through a year-long task force and completely reorganized a lot of the processes as well as the organization to make sure that we would have a better workflow for all of the IT that we deal with. And our enterprise systems are fairly robust. We have the world's largest purpose-built network, and that's with about 800,000 users, about 500,000 end-user devices. So we cover a lot of ground. And we are looking for lots of different types of technology that will work well in what we would call a cyber-denied environment, one with extremely low bandwidth, an environment where there has to be a lot of microservices available, where things restore very quickly, and of course, to top it all off, it has to be very easy to use. It has to be something that if it's on a ship or a plane, and you have someone that's not an IT person trying to do something, they will be able to handle things intuitively. So those are kind of some of the goals that we're looking at right now. Thank you for having us here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Frank Konechny. My mic working? Yes.
Yes, it is.
All right. I'm the CTO of the Air Force. I cover everything that Dave talked about and more. It's kind of interesting. I mean, the Air Force is 800,000 plus approaching, and we replaced all our laptops this year. Now, that's interesting all by itself, but that's because we have to do it for Win 10. Now, some of them are not done for some of the systems because they're very messy and they can't be replaced, but that's one of the things we did for security. But if you look at the Air Force has 256 sites across the world. It has 126 major bases, which means that we have 126 cities. So when you talk about, SCADA solutions and other operational solutions, we have 126 of those out there that are running power plants, running chemical plants, running almost everything you could possibly think of is out there right now. So we have that issue. We have various missions at each of those bases, which means that we have various fuels at those bases as well as various ways of actually setting off airplanes and everything else associated with those bases. So we are a very big multinational organization, if you will, which is kind of interesting to look at it. Because when we talk about IT security and everything else, we start talking about how we want to get out of the IT business and actually sell it, use it as a service, because we want to be able to concentrate on mission. I mean, that's our whole purpose in life, is to concentrate on mission now. So when we say we want to do network as a service or desktop as a service, or we want to do software as a service, which we're into also, we want to make sure that we actually repurpose the airmen into a mission-oriented structure. And some of the things we're doing right now is talking about mission defense teams. That on the bases, we are setting up mission defense teams, which is supposed to look at the mission threads that they have. And the mission thread consists of the actual weapon system, the plane, the fuel trucks associated with it, the server farms that are associated supporting it, the people involved as well. Because you have to make sure that the pilots and the crew are well before you actually put them on a mission. So if you think of it as a holistic view, we're going out and doing now mission threat analysis, as well as looking at how we can support that thread out there in the field. Because the Air Force believes that we will be, if we are going to fight, we're going to be cut off, every base is going to be cut off from the comm network. So the individual bases have to exist by themselves to do their job. So when we talk about cloud computing, we talk about having essential mission apps at the bases. So we have clouds at the bases. And this drives DoD crazy because they say, how are you going to cut out your clouds? And we say, we're going to have 126. And they say, you're not going to decrease it? And we say, yes, we have. But you have to understand that means it's a decrease for us in terms of consolidating multiple clouds at a base as opposed to anything else. But we have to have a cloud usually at the base no matter what. There are a couple of bases which maybe not have to, but the vast majority will have apps that are actually running there. And so when they talk about cloud computing, for instance, we talk about how we're going to go to the commercial cloud or how we're going to go to the DoD cloud. And we're doing that. In fact, we were one of the first ones to have software as a service for us on the DoD side. And we did it purposely because we had to. We were running a system, DISA was running a system that was not working right, and we had to upgrade the system. We couldn't upgrade it. So we were actually forced into doing that, and it was the best thing we ever did. And that was the disruption, and there's a lot of other disruptions out there we can talk about, but that drives us. If you think about it, how we're being more mission focused right now across the board and how we want to be able to bring technology to that mission focus. And that's my job, is really bring technology across the board to the mission focus, and that includes the space assets, as well as the ground assets, as well as the aerial assets. And we're talking about doing this in a way that we actually bring in the cyber domain as well into a unified multi-domain operations center. And how we were actually going to manage that and actually create that is going to be very interesting. But it's a lot of technology that has to be integrated together.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. Well, maybe related, sort of picking up on that idea of bringing technology to the mission. How can industry best help you support the implementation and execution of new technologies such that you can get started on your journey in achieving results more quickly? And maybe, Pat, I would start with you. How can we sort of help?
Well, so one of the interesting things on this topic, right? There's a lot of, I'd say there's 5 major factors that we deal with when we talk about bringing technology into the department, right? And it spans all of it, and both of my esteemed colleagues have mentioned it, right? The first one, without calling it out, well, the first one just calling it out is scale. It's absolute scale. So when you start talking about everything that Dr. Lang said and Mr. Kaczynski said, right, and you look at this, you're talking about the neighborhood of just on our unclassified network, right, which I like to call our milk and eggs network. This is the network that we move troops on. This is where we put bread on the table. We do things like that. You're talking in the neighborhood of 7 million endpoints, right? So you're talking about 10 times the size of what Fletcher was talking about, what they have together. The understanding of the scale of that is huge, right? The second thing in that area is understanding the fact that we operate with the taxpayers' dollars. We have to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. So that creates policy documents. We all remember the days of the $800 toilet seats and the $5,000 hammer, whatever it was, right? There's policy put in place to make sure that money is executed in the right way. Well, policy has a tendency to be rigid and kind of slows things down, right? So we have to under its scale, we have to operate with policy documents, right? And those policy documents are there for a reason. The third thing, which is where I start to worry about quite a bit, is the security aspect of it, right? So we have people come in and they say, you need this product. Well, why do I need the product, first off, right? So underneath the Dod car thing that we talk about, and Frank mentioned the Windows 10 thing, let me tell you the backstory how that got there. A group of folks were set up to do an analysis, and they put together this framework I talked about, and they did the analysis, and they came back and said, oh, by the way, DoD CIO, Terry Halverson was a DoD CIO at the time, said, we're about to spend $300 million on a system, JRSS, right?
Yep.
That's going to get us 2% better coverage against this threat map. Or we could spend $27 million and go to Windows 10 and get 67% better increase. So we actually have a return on investment system real quick, right? So Terry came to my office and said, we got to go see DepSecDef. We went and saw DepSecDef work, and DepSecDef work did like all great Americans and said, you've hit upon the holy grail. It's the entire solution for everything. Everybody go to Windows 10 in a year, right? Probably a little bit difficult to do, right? Probably doesn't apply to all the weapon systems that he just named to go down to, right? Heart was in the right place. Things were in the right place, right? So first off, right? So again, recap, scale, policy documents. Does it address the actual threat, right, in a way that we can do return on investment? So I also want to know, when you come tell me, what do you want me to take out of the network, right? And the thing that ties, the next thing about that is, where did you build it? I'm sorry, but my organization has had a little bit of a problem with insider threat this past couple of years, if you haven't noticed, right? But if you've kind of outsourced this to a lab in China, I'm probably going to want to tear it apart. If you've taken it and sent it over, outsourced a section of it to India, I'm probably going to want to take it apart, right? Whether that's the hardware aspect of it or the software aspect of it. And then last but not least, and you must understand this, right? The DoD dollars are fungible. There's a set budget. That's why we call it a budget. It may be a large budget, but it's a budget. Anything that we decide to bring in new means that I've got to stop doing something that was old. That could be an aircraft carrier. That could be an F-35. That could be a tank. That could be somebody's job in some senator's precinct someplace else, right? That trade space has to be negotiated all the time, right? It's just a fact that we live in. I have my Bitcoin socks on, right? There are some great technologies and opportunities that come in here. So I've got to factor those 5 things when I bring the technology in, right? And then I got to factor in the biggest one of them all. How's it going to help me do my mission? And my mission is to defend the United States of America and its interests. So if you're coming in to tell me how am I going to do better software so I can pay people better, okay, not sure. Help me with that language. Because you're really telling me to take an aircraft carrier offline, right? Or take a B-2 offline so that somebody can get Netflix better? Not worried about that. Help me understand what it means to the mission and what it means to the warfighter.
Excellent. So many good things in there. By the way, your the air is pretty thin up there when our 800,000 endpoints is an order of magnitude smaller than the next person in the room. Normally, when I go out and speak to people, it's a somewhat impressive scale, but this is a humbling room.
Oh, my guys, we sneeze at that.
Yeah, right. That's small potatoes for you guys.
800,000.
Yeah. And then your point about having some discipline around one funnel of work, and something comes in at the expense of something else, and who does that prioritization? And I liked your comment about Windows too. Anecdotally, when we went back and looked at what did it cost us to migrate from Windows XP to Windows 7, it actually would have been cheaper just to buy everyone new laptops. But the only person that could have made that call sat very high in the organization and didn't have the end-to-end view of the problem.
Right.
And so getting the right data in the right hands. Oh, maybe Dr. Lang, I would ask you the same question. How can we kind of industry help bring technology to help you execute your mission better?
I think all the right technologies, there are a lot of right technologies. That's one of the issues is there are so many beautiful, shiny objects, and everybody has one that does something beautifully, and it does something better than everything else in its field. But I have to go back to what Pat said, as a technical person, I'm very frequently willing to go down a rabbit hole to talk about technology because it's just really cool. It's really kind of fun. But what I'm looking for is something that pushes the mission forward, something that helps us accelerate so that we're ready, so that everything we have is ready. The Navy is how we project power in the world. It's how we make sure that the fight doesn't come to our doorstep. And it's extremely important to make sure that we are ready to fulfill that mission. So I am interested in things that help us with that readiness, things that help us move faster, things that make us more agile, things that support the warfighter, things that will help us work with technologies that don't update that rapidly. For example, every 18 months we may get brand new computers. We don't get brand new aircraft carriers. And some of them have some pretty impressive, I'm going to call them technical challenges, because they may not be completely up to date on everything, because they're out doing a mission, and the only time we touch them is when they come back. So there's a little bit of lag. We need to have a way to touch them on mission without disrupting the mission, without disrupting the technology. We can't afford to do an upgrade while we're out doing a mission and have it break something. So it's incredibly important that technology converges in such a way that it becomes very easy for these things to happen, that we drive the complexity out and that we drive effectiveness in. And in so doing, it's going to make the life much easier for the warfighter. And one of the things that we need to deal with going through this, as Pat said, there are the policies, there are the checks and balances to make sure that the taxpayer dollars are being spent appropriately. Part of that policy includes the certification and accreditation, or in today's words, the authorization of a system so that it can be used. And that goes through many steps of checking to ensure that all the security pieces are in place, that everything is appropriate, in the environment, in the system, in the software. And it would really be helpful if we had technology come to us that had been so well tested and so well documented that we could shorten that process. Right now, one of the efforts that we're working on is called Compile to Combat. And this is taking an entire mission thread and making sure that the technologies interleave and converge in such a way that we have extremely rapid movement from beginning to get an application, going through sending it to a ship, getting it deployed, and making sure that people can use it in a very, very short time period. So things that make our processes more efficient would be very, very helpful as well.
This is the quintessential IT problem, right? How do you change the tire on the car while you're going 80 miles an hour down the highway? And your comment about speed and agility, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but we were joking over lunch that being in IT is like being a brain surgeon where they invent a new brain every 18 months. And being good at that can't be a hobby, right? That's a full-time endeavor. Well, maybe I'll just stay with Dr. Lang for a minute. And outside of the acquisition process, so setting that aside for a minute, what obstacles do you see there that either prevent or restrict your ability to take advantage of disruptive technologies and bring them into your mission?
I wouldn't say that it's an obstacle as much as the checking to make sure that everything's right. We work through several layers of regulation when we go through to set up a new technology, to have it proven in the lab, to have that technology transfer happen to where it can become operational. There are several layers of things that have to be checked, that have to just processes that need to go through to make sure that Congress understands that we are taking care of the taxpayer dollars and we're not just really having fun with them. It's important to be able to track everything that we do. And it's critical to do that. But we need a way to make that happen faster. We need a way to help people move through the processes. And I would say probably that authorization or certification process is the one where we spend most time. It is very manually intensive at this point, although in the Compile to Combat, we are looking to automate that to an extreme degree, which will be very helpful. And as we roll that out, we're looking at cutting the timeline dramatically. So I think that help in a similar manner throughout the different mission threads, that would be one of the things that I think we would look for.
Okay, great. Maybe Mr. Robertson, I'd ask you the same from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I think we're right on the same topic again, right? So the accreditation issue is a huge discussion point, and it has started to manifest itself in a way that is probably not healthy, but actually natural. So if you're familiar at all with something like the risk mitigation framework, right? So the risk mitigation framework out of NIST and now in other places is where I started talking about at the very beginning. A risk mitigation framework is a process. It's a process, right? So I was hosting another working group and I asked some folks, who liked the risk mitigation framework? Half the room raised their hand, half the room didn't raise their hand. Who hated the risk mitigation framework? Half the room raised their hand, the other half didn't raise their hand. What was the problem? Too rigid, too flexible, right? That was the two problems. The reality is the risk mitigation framework, like any framework, any risk mitigation framework, whether it's MIRA, ORDA, whatever the ones you're using, is a framework. It's an input, process, output system. It asks you a very basic question at the very beginning, which is, what is your threat? As I said at the very beginning, we don't know the threat. We don't know the threat in a way that can be used by architects and engineers. We don't know the threat in a way that can be used by accreditors. So what happens is folks have a tendency to do things like guess, right? How many of your architects and engineers will tell you that they have to address the unknown unknown? Anybody hear that? Every single one. I've heard it from so many people, right? Does any business in the world address the unknown of unknowns? So normally when I give this talk in another area, I ask folks that live in Maryland, how many of you have earthquake insurance? Nobody raises their hand. I'm like, why not? That's an unknown of unknown, right? You're telling me you're going to architect for an unknown of unknown, but you don't have earthquake insurance, right? It doesn't make any sense. The reality is because it doesn't make any sense financially, right? So if we're designing systems without understanding the threat, we're either over-designing them, spending too much money, hence a very long accreditation process, or we're under-designing them without understanding the threat. That goes to another person to check who's got to decide they're going to make it up, hence an overlong accreditation process, right? So the overlong accreditation process doesn't make any sense. So in the Dod car group that we're working on, we're working with NIST and everybody else to kind of solve that problem and speed it up. We've got a tool that we call it TurboTax for Dod car. Don't sue me, TurboTax, right? That actually takes that entire processes and automates it down to 2 hours for somebody who has absolutely no idea what threat is, nor know what RMF is. They literally just go through and say, here's a heat map of all the bad things the bad guys have demonstrated that they do to me. Here's a list of capabilities. I just click on them until they turn green. Then when they click green, I hit a button and it produces a requirements document for me. I'm good. Now I give it to an engineer for an engineer to actually go figure out what to do with, right? That's the stuff we're talking about where we need help in, right? You're coming in trying to sell me better things like how do I put blockchain on a B-52 that was built in the 50s? But what would I use blockchain on a B-52 for? To drop bombs better, right? Oh, okay, great. I could use it to help with the NC2 codebook stuff. Let's have that conversation. But just don't come in and tell me about a gee whiz thing, right? But as the services are saying, right? The services are saying right now, listen to what they're telling you. We have a very complex process. Help us clean that process up. Help us make it faster, right? That's what they're asking for help in. Help me understand threat in a way that I can move it over, not to my SOC, not to my incident response folks, but to my architects and engineers. We produce threat in a way that's designed, sorry, I'm on a soapbox, right? Sorry, shouldn't have asked this question, right? So we produce threat so that the decision makers of this world can make strategic decisions, right? Do I go to war? Do I not go to war? Do I put trade balance embargoes in? Do I not put trade embargoes in, right? Or we produce threat that's for, do I block this at the firewall? What do I look at on the hard drive from an IOC mutex type of perspective? Where do we produce threat for the guys and gals that sit down and say, I need to design this network? Where do we produce it? We actually think they just know what it is. I'm a guy, my wife thinks I can fix a car. Don't let me near a car, right? But we do this in the cybersecurity area and the computer science because we sit there and say, you went to school for computer science. You should be able to fix my iPhone. I've never worked on an iPhone since iPhone 4, right? But we make this assumption. That's where we need the help, right? We need the help to take those processes to make them transparent, to make them fast, right? And guess what? Those are all in class. They don't need special clearances, right? What they need is people thinking outside the box, not people that have been thinking about it for the past 20 years, because they're going to continue to think about it the way they thought for the past 20 years. We need industry to come in and say, listen, this process you have here, actually, if you did it and do it in parallel, if you did it distributed, and you did it with some Elasticsearch, and you put it in this kind of a framework, you could pop this out pretty quick, right? Not, let me tell you how to do blockchain on a B-52. Sorry, right? Soapbox over. Next.
I got one on top of that.
Yeah. Pile on.
Well, it's something that we're actually doing. Same as the Navy, we're actually doing ATO in a day technology.
Yeah.
We actually have now agreed to the process of actually, if you go through the process between all these devices and the outputs that come out, we will issue an ATO immediately for
Sweet.
that particular application. So we're at that process right now. Now, the other thing we are trying to do is a special task I have is for continuous monitoring now, not only for RMF, but also for FISCAM controls. So we're looking at it from both viewpoints, from the financial side as well as the threat side. How can we actually do a continuous monitoring using particular scans and everything else that we have, and coming back with the results that says, here, authorizing official, you have a problem. And it's financial also, so you have to bring in the FM guys now.
That's awesome.
Well, for the IBMers in the room, I think I heard there's a big sales opportunity for blockchain in the Air Force.
The A-10s maybe.
A-10s? All right. Well, speaking of the Air Force, maybe we head back over to you. And those of you who were in the keynote this morning probably heard about this, what the IBM is trying to brand the Watson's Law, but the idea being that the amount of data being generated is quickly exceeding, or perhaps has now exceeded, human capacity for interpretation, analysis, and we're going to need to bring some other technology to bear on that problem. And so statistics show rate of data growth somewhere around 80%. Is that something that you're seeing in your organizations? How are you thinking about that? How are you addressing it?
Oh, we only have a few videos that come down from the sky every day. A few exabytes.
Maybe blockchain could help.
Keeps pushing that, we have lots of information. I mean, it's a ton of information. We have videos coming down. We have other things throughout the network that we actually monitor on a continuous basis. The issue that we had was, how do you govern all this data? That's always been the issue. We've established now a CDO that is the governance body for all of the data the Air Force has, because the Air Force uses data as a strategic asset right now. And as we progress down the path is, how are we going to utilize this data? And so when we set up the office, we were working on a data panel basically about 2 years ago, where we realized that we couldn't find things in the Air Force. We couldn't find data. So we said, hey, let's get together and try to organize this and governance in such a way that we can actually ask other people in the organization where the information is now. Now we're getting to the point that we have the governance pretty much in place. We've had the panel running for 2 years. We have now a structure by which we can actually bring in data into the systems now and to actually do some analytics, as well as get rid of some of the point-to-point interfaces. Now, we still have lots of data. I mean, we just ran a really AI ML piece on some of the engine data we got from the AWACS. We ingested 6 years of data. 6 years of data is a lot of data from the AWACS. We also ingested the weather that was associated where the aircraft actually flew, and we also ingested what parts that they actually substituted in, because they don't actually buy new parts a lot of times. They salvage parts from other aircraft and pass them around. And so it came back as, how are you going to do preventive maintenance for this aircraft now? And this is just the AWACS. There's not that many AWACS. So this was an experiment within 6 months to see how fast we could actually push stuff together. And so we're getting great success with that. And now we talk about, okay, let's do it for the F-35. Now that's a totally different ballgame, because the F-35 comes out with, 30 times the amount of data that the other ones come out with. So the question is, how are we going to mesh that together? We also have, from the imagery side, we get lots of images. You guys probably know that from all the drones we have. The question becomes, and we had a presentation, how do you identify that object that's in the picture? And we're using AI techniques for that also. Some neural networks and everything that's combined together. The problem that we have is that we don't really get real good HD video from the drones. There's usually clouds, rain, sun, angle of incidence. Everybody shows perfectly perfect video and say, hey, I can identify all these objects. And it's like really cool. When you're looking right on top of it, yeah, I can identify lots of objects. Mm-hmm. We're looking from the side and it's raining outside, I can't.
Yeah.
So the imagery that we were working with has to be much more sophisticated multi-machine learning algorithms than we've ever seen before. And so we're using that now in different ways of doing that. And you see a great emphasis for us right now is going back to multiple neural net cognitive philosophy, how we're actually going to be using things and training things in that manner. So the data emphasis is, data is an asset for us. It's a key asset now. We're trying to go back and figure out what will support mission. Like the engineering one was preventive maintenance for the engines. How much money could you actually save, or really re-spend for something else? And it's interesting, the first thing that came out of it, that we over-provisioned parts, because we're not sure where we're going to need parts. Mm-hmm. And so we over-provisioned the parts and put them out there in the warehouse. And then eventually we get to use them, but that's not going to save money, because it spends more money initially to make sure you have parts and so on. So this is actually a way of looking at it, a different way. We never thought of that before. We thought we'd do better preventive maintenance. We didn't realize we were having a parts inventory issue. So as we go through more and more data, we're finding more and more key information that's coming out that we never thought of before, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's sort of the relationships that you don't know about, right, that it can bring insight to. And I think AI is interesting. If we were playing IT lingo bingo, by the way, like it was not the IBMer who said AI first in the room. It was the Air Force guys, just so we're all. But there's a great article, if you haven't seen it. Elon Musk tells this kind of tale of a guy out cherry picking, and they apply AI to the machine, and it sort of self-optimizes until there are no cherries left in the world. But it's you know, it's not just a feature of technology. It might be the ultimate technology, so that we can augment all human decision making with better facts, better insights. And I like the procurement and sourcing example. There's different application, but same problem in my shop. Maybe, Mr. Robertson, I'd ask you kind of a similar question.
NSA does not collect any data. Now, so,
How true.
Do you have a lot of data?
yeah, so there's some interesting things in this area, right? A lot of different kind of neat little stories. I'll be honest with you, I'm starting a pilot right now. That thing I talked about earlier with the Dod car, and we take a framework, and the way we build the framework, or we actually build a heat map, and what we do is we go through all the incident reporting. We do it by hand, right? So we go through an incident report, read the incident report, find out what the adversary is trying to do. The adversary is trying to write the disk, and we make a little check mark on this block and go through the stuff, right? And we're going to start a pilot working with some, probably some machine learning to kind of plug into that kind of thing, to kind of automate non-structured data in that way to try to get at it. And one of the reasons why I was talking with my NIST brethren the other day, and Jody looked at me and she said, you know, we looked at 42 different data sets, and 42 is a made-up number, right? It's a large number. She said, there's only a 7% overlap on incidents. And I said, wow, the problem's bigger than I thought, right? We've got all these different people, nation states, guys living in basements, gals sitting in the computer lab hacking us. And they said, no, you don't understand. We think there's only a 7% overlap because we don't have an agreed terminology. So as technology comes along, we kind of do a couple things, right? We invent new terms, right? Or better yet, we take a perfectly good, fine OODA loop, which I love, right? Air Force brethren. And decide to change it into sense-making, decision-making, and acting, which is like, why did you rename that, right? So the other day I got an email that said that the URL was defanged as part of the spear phishing thing. As a spear phishing attack. So I can think of as some guy sitting on the side of a pond with a dog, and he's throwing it in the water at things, trying to catch fish. And I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. So in the data area that we're talking about is how do we take all this data and make sense of it, right? How do we orientate against it? And that's really, I think, where machine learning can do now. I think we're generations off from getting to an AI that can do anything with battle space awareness, right? That's my friends at CERDAC tell me. So where are we at now? There's a couple things that's really interesting. Trending, right? Trending of events on your network, right? Specifically looking at certain things like, did Pete start off in this area, and over 12 months, all of a sudden, he's now once a day hitting the financial area? Why is that, right? So heuristic behavior of the network. Who's doing what on the network, right? I would actually argue that most of the time that we have a lot of the data that we need, we just don't know what we're looking at, right? That's pretty much, so the machine learning's got to help us optimize that, right? The second thing, and this comes to a challenge coming back in the department, right? Talking about what is it going to do for us and what's the return on investment. We have this nomenclature thing I talked about, we keep changing names. We have a nomenclature problem in the department, right? So Air Force has done a wonderful job deploying a new capability that is a command and control system. That's what it is, right? It does a lot of great things. I don't know if it's appropriate to call it out, but it does a lot of great things. I'm not endorsing it. But it plugs in the modules that are there, right? One of the organizations that has some buying power in the department said you can't buy that because Dod Car, my group, said you had to buy an endpoint device remediation suite, and that's not what it is. Endpoint device remediation suites can contain an antivirus. Well, this one plugs into the Windows native antivirus, so why do I have to put something else on top of it? Because policy says this, right? So so again, I'm sorry, I'm going off track, right? The amount of data is not as much of a problem as deciding what we're going to do with the data, right? Once we decide what you're going to do with the data, then you can start to figure out where it is, right? And there's some other things you need to be factored of. fog computing as much as cloud computing. Bringing data all the way back to a central repository, right, is probably not necessarily the right thing you want to do all the time, right? Especially when you look at something like, I don't know, right? Bringing all the data from Korea back to Hawaii so that it can be processed in Hawaii while a volcano is going off is probably not where you want to be, right? So some kind of distributed fog computing where it can be done at the front end when it needs to be, the things that need to be done at the front end, and what needs to be done at the back end. And all that has to be factored in, right? Right now, it's not being factored in. There's no, I'll put it this way, and everybody can yell at me. I don't think there's a data strategy.
We have a data strategy.
Awesome. You guys have a data strategy. Good, right?
We have one for the Air Force, too.
Yeah, we have.
But DOD does
We
not
have
Okay,
it,
so
yes.
DOD doesn't have a data. Okay, I can put on my DOD hat. DOD doesn't have a data strategy, right? But for us to understand that thing, we have to have that data strategy. I'll tell you, the Intel community does. That's how we can answer short notice queries from Congress, right? So when I say NSA doesn't collect data, that's obviously not true, right? But we do it in compliance with the law. And we do it in compliance with the law. That's not a joke. I swear to God, right? We do it in compliance with the law, and there's a lot of good people that work on this, right? But they do it because they have a data strategy. So when they're asked about certain things, they can produce it, right? And they can make sure they're not doing things that are illegal, right? That's the point. Anyways, sorry.
No, I love your comments about AI kind of in a vacuum by itself, very little value, right? And AI combined with domain expertise and prior knowledge, whole different ballgame. And something like 92% of all commands issued to Siri or Alexa are about the weather or to play music, because it doesn't know anything else. And so big distance between that and kind of what you're talking about.
I still call mine Allegra.
Correct.
Well, maybe the last question. Oh, Dr. Lang.
I think the AI is something I would like to address. I think that is absolutely critical for all of us moving forward. The machine learning, making sure that we can use the data that we have. What we're doing right now is working on the data strategy, making sure that we have all of the data set up so that it's easily ingestible. And I think that those are extremely important preparations to make sure that when AI is ready to go, that we can get the most benefit from it. But I think moving forward, it's critical. We have to move at what we would call the speed of relevance, and that's going to be a lot faster than people can react.
I agree with you. As an IBMer, I'm very excited about the advances that are being made there. But as an American, we cannot lose the AI or the quantum advantage.
I agree.
Exactly.
I agree. We're in a world of hurt. We lose quantum.
So I think we've got like 2 minutes or so left, and maybe we can open it up to the room. I think there's a roaming mic. No, we can't do that?
No.
We cannot do that. But what I was saying is there are no questions.
I've succeeded in my plan.
That concludes our panel. I would love for you to give these folks a round of applause for joining us today.